She whispered it across the table at the steakhouse. She thought I couldn't hear her. She had not yet learned that older women hear better than younger women assume, especially in restaurants with hard surfaces and a husband who used to whisper to me from across the kitchen for 43 years. By Monday morning, I had smiled at the waiter, paid the bill, and made one phone call from the parking lot that would end the arrangement she had been quietly building since 2021. Here is what actually happened. My name is Patricia. I am 72 years old. My husband Walter died in 2020. We had been married for 43 years. He had been a high school principal for 31 of those years. He had retired in 2015 with a small but solid pension, a paid-off colonial in a leafy suburb of Cincinnati, and the steady habit of saying, "Patricia, we have enough," whenever I asked him whether we should buy something we wanted. We had had enough. We still had enough. The pension survived him. The investments produced enough monthly income for me to live comfortably. The house was mine, paid off, with low property taxes. I was not wealthy. I was not poor. I was, by every honest measurement, a comfortable widow. In the 4 years since Walter died, I had also, without quite meaning to, become the slow, quiet ATM of my son's family. It had not started that way. It had started as these things do, with a credit card. In the spring of 2021, my son Daniel had called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He had used the careful voice he uses when he is about to ask me for something he and his wife Ashley had already decided I would say yes to. "Mom, listen. Ashley and I were talking. With Dad gone, we are worried about you handling everything by yourself. The bills, the household stuff, the maintenance. We thought, what if Ashley and I were added as authorized users on one of your cards, just so we could help? We could pick up groceries for you, handle small things. You wouldn't even have to think about it. Just having us on the card would make life easier for you." I had said yes. I had said yes because Walter had died 15 months earlier, and because I had been tired, and because Daniel was my only son, and because the proposal had been framed as a kindness rather than an extraction. Ashley had even sent me a thank you card the week after she received her authorized user card in the mail. The card had been hand-painted with watercolor flowers. The note inside had said, "Patricia, you are the most generous mother-in-law in the world. Thank you for trusting us. With love, Ashley." I had saved the card. I had saved it because the watercolor flowers had been beautiful and because the note had seemed sincere. It had been sincere in May of 2021. It had stopped being sincere by November of 2021, when I had received my first credit card statement that contained charges I had not made. $342 at a children's clothing store, $218 at a wine shop, $460 at a salon I had never heard of. I had called Daniel. I had asked, in the careful voice I had used since 1953, when I asked my mother whether the cake she had baked was for company or for us. "Sweetheart, I noticed some charges on the card this month that I think are yours and Ashley's. They came to about $1,000. Is everything okay?" He had said, "Oh, Mom, yeah, sorry. We should have mentioned it. Ashley had a thing with her hair, and Lily needed some school clothes, and we picked up a couple of bottles of wine for the dinner thing on Saturday. We'll Venmo you back this week. Promise." He had not Venmo'd me back. I had not pressed. That had been 3 years and 7 months ago. In those 3 years and 7 months, the charges had not stopped. They had grown. By 2022, the monthly statements had averaged about $1,400 in their charges. By 2023, the average had been $2,200. In 2024, the monthly statements had been averaging $2,800 to $3,200 in charges I had not personally made. Across 43 months, I had paid approximately $96,000 in charges that had belonged to my son and his wife. Daniel had never Venmo'd me back. I had stopped expecting him to. I had also, somewhere in 2023, stopped reading the statements line by line. I had simply paid them because the autopay was tied to my checking account. And because the alternative, calling Daniel and itemizing what he and Ashley had spent on my card that month, felt larger than I was yet willing to make it. I had laughed each time I noticed a particularly absurd charge: a $600 standing mixer, a $1,200 leather jacket, a $4,300 weekend at a beach resort Ashley had described on Instagram as self-care for the soul. I had laughed because laughing was easier than calling. The laughing got harder in October of 2024. In October, Ashley had asked me, in a phone call, whether I had ever considered adding Daniel as an authorized signer on the credit card instead of just an authorized user. She had explained in the bright voice she uses for things, she has already decided. I will agree to that the difference would be administrative, that it would streamline things, that it would let Daniel handle the card in case anything ever happened to me, God forbid. Patricia. I had said I would think about it. I had not thought about it. I had, however, called my bank. The bank had explained to me, in patient language, that adding Daniel as an authorized signer would not be administrative. It would give him equal legal control over the account. It would mean he could request a new card, request a higher credit limit, and in certain circumstances, refuse to take his name off the account without my written consent. It would have converted what had been. In 2021, a small, generous favor, adding my son as an authorized user into a structural co-ownership of my line of credit. I had thanked the banker. I had not added Daniel as an authorized signer. I had not yet told Ashley I had declined. I had thought, at the time, that the topic would pass. It had not passed. It had been the prelude. In early November, Daniel had called me about the birthday dinner. It was Ashley's 40th birthday on the 15th. They wanted to host a small dinner at a steakhouse in the city, a restaurant called Halloran's, which was the kind of restaurant where the entrees started at $56 and the wine list was kept in a leather binder. They wanted me to come. They wanted Daniel's brother Mark and his wife Kerry to come. They wanted Ashley's sister Bridget and her husband Trent to come. They wanted Daniel and Ashley's 2 children, Lily, age 14, and Connor, age 11, to be at the table, because Ashley had said it was important for the kids to be at real grown-up restaurants from a young age. 9 people. At Halloran's. I had asked Daniel on the phone whether they had reserved a private room. He had said, "Yeah, the small private room. It's like a really nice room." Ashley picked it out. I had asked how much the private room cost. He had said, "I think it's free if we hit a certain minimum, like $700 or something. We'll definitely hit that." I had said, "Sweetheart, let me ask. Are you and Ashley paying for the dinner? Or are you expecting that I might cover some of it?" He had paused. He had said, "Mum, well, we were hoping, listen, it's Ashley's 40th. It's a big one. We were hoping that since you were coming, and since you've always been so generous, that maybe it would be sort of a gift from you, like a really nice gift. Instead of an actual present." I had not said anything for a moment. Then I had said, "Sweetheart, let me think about it. I'll let you know in a few days." He had said, "Sure, Mom, no pressure. We wanted to ask you first before we asked anyone else, because you've been the most generous. We thought it would make sense." We had hung up. I had sat at my kitchen table for 41 minutes. I had thought about the watercolor card from 2021. I had thought about the $96,000 in charges across 43 months. I had thought about the fact that my son had just asked me, in advance, to pay for his wife's 40th birthday dinner at a restaurant where the entrees started at $56. I had thought about the fact that he had used the phrase, "like a really nice gift," instead of an actual present. I had thought about the fact that he had said, "We wanted to ask you first before we asked anyone else." I had noticed, in that final phrase, that I was in the architecture of his planning, the first phone call he made when he needed money, not the last resort. The first phone call. I had noticed. I had decided something on that Tuesday afternoon at my kitchen table. I had decided that I would, in fact, attend the birthday dinner at Halloran's. I had decided that I would, in fact, pay the bill at the end of the evening, with a smile and I had decided that on Monday morning, the day after the dinner, I would make a single phone call from my own kitchen that would end the arrangement that had begun with watercolor flowers in May of 2021. I called Daniel back at 6:30 p.m. I told him I would be happy to cover the dinner. He said, "Mom, thank you so much. You are the absolute best. Ashley is going to be so happy." We hung up. I noted that he had not asked me whether the cost was a burden. I noted that he had not offered to cover any portion of it. I noted that the conversation had ended exactly as he and Ashley had planned it would end. I poured myself a glass of wine. I sat at the kitchen table. I waited for Friday the 15th. I want to pause here and ask you something honestly. If you had been paying for your daughter-in-law's salon visits and weekend getaways for 3 years and 7 months quietly, without making a fuss, because the alternative felt larger than you wanted to make it, and your son had then called you to ask you to pay for her 40th birthday dinner at a high-end steakhouse as a gift instead of an actual present, what would you have done in the next 10 seconds? I think a lot of mothers would have declined politely on the phone. I think some would have shouted. I think a brave handful would have asked their son to explain, in writing, why his mother was the first phone call when his wife wanted something expensive. I did none of those 3 things. I said yes. I said yes, because the bill at Halloran's, however large it would turn out to be, was not the problem. It was a symptom. The problem was the autopay on my credit card. The problem was that Ashley had asked, in October, to be made an authorized signer. The problem was that the arrangement that had begun in May of 2021 had been growing in small accumulating increments for 43 months. I could decline the birthday dinner. I could decline it, and Ashley would be hurt for a week. And Daniel would call me and ask me whether everything was all right. And I would say, of course, everything is all right. And the arrangement would continue. The charges on the card would continue. The October request to convert the authorized user status into an authorized signer status would come back in a different form in March. By 2026, Ashley would be requesting joint ownership of the line of credit. By 2027, Daniel would be calling me to ask whether I had ever considered restructuring my will to give him power of attorney now, just to streamline things in case anything ever happened. The birthday dinner was an opportunity. It was the opportunity to let them sit at the table at Halloran's, in the private room they had picked out, and order whatever they wanted, and feel for one final evening exactly the way they had been feeling for 3.5 years. And then, on Monday morning, to end it, I needed them to feel it one last time, so that I would know, with the slow, careful certainty of a woman who had been laughing for 3.5 years, that what I was about to do was not an overreaction. It was a calibrated response. I was not going to overreact. I was going to attend the dinner. I was going to pay the bill. I was going to smile. And then I was going to call my bank. I arrived at Halloran's at 7:15 p.m. on Friday, November 15th. I was wearing a navy dress and the small pearl necklace Walter had given me on our 25th anniversary. I had driven myself. I had told Daniel and Ashley I would meet them at the restaurant. The private room had been reserved on the 2nd floor. The hostess walked me up the stairs. The room was wood-panelled, with a long table set for 9, a small chandelier above, and a single window overlooking the courtyard at the back of the building. Daniel, Ashley, Mark, Kerry, Bridget, Trent, Lily, and Connor were already there. Ashley was wearing a black dress that I recognized from an Instagram post she had made in October. She had described the dress, at the time, as a little splurge for my big year. I had paid for the splurge. I had not realized I had paid for it until I had reviewed the September statement on a Sunday afternoon and noticed an $1,180 charge at a designer boutique in the city. She hugged me at the door. She said, "Patricia, you came. You look beautiful. I am so glad you're here." I said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She led me to my seat. The seat was at the foot of the table. I noticed that immediately. The foot of the table, at a 9-person dinner, was where the host or hostess customarily sat. The head of the table was Ashley's seat, clearly marked by a small floral arrangement she had ordered for the occasion. Daniel was at her right. The 2 children were at the far end of the table near me. The other 4 guests filled out the sides. I was at the foot of the table because in the architecture of the evening Ashley had planned I was the host. The host paid. The host's position was marked, in the small choreography of high-end American dining, by the seat farthest from the door. I noticed the seat. I noticed the floral arrangement at the head of the table. I sat down. I smiled. The meal proceeded. The waiter, a tall young man named Ethan, explained the specials. The specials included a 48-day dry-aged ribeye for $96, a Wagyu strip steak for $128, and a tomahawk for 2 people at $196. There were 3 wine sommeliers attached to the private room because the room itself was attached to a tasting program. Ashley had selected the tasting program in advance. The tasting program added $180 per person, regardless of what was actually consumed. Ashley ordered the Wagyu strip. Daniel ordered the tomahawk to share with anyone who wants a bite. Bridget ordered the dry-aged ribeye. Trent ordered the Wagyu strip. Mark ordered the salmon, which was the cheapest entree on the menu at $46. Mark's wife Kerry ordered the chicken. The children ordered a kids' menu that had not been mentioned to me, but which Ashley had clearly arranged in advance. Small pasta plates at $22 each, plus dessert flights at $15 each. I ordered the salmon. I drank water. I had decided, on the drive over, that I would not be drinking wine at this dinner. I would need to be sober for what I was about to do. The meal was, in many ways, a normal birthday dinner. People laughed. Ashley's sister gave a small speech. Daniel toasted his wife. The children were well behaved. The food was good. The wine which I tasted from a small pour Ethan brought me to confirm a selection I had not actually been consulted on was excellent. At 8:43 p.m., something happened. I was halfway through my salmon. Ashley was telling a story about a friend of hers who had recently splurged on a kitchen renovation. Trent was explaining to Mark how he had recently negotiated a raise. Daniel was looking at the bottle of red wine he had just opened. The 2 waiters had stepped out of the room briefly. Ashley leaned across the table, across her husband, across the floral arrangement, across the chandelier light, and she said something to Bridget. She did not realize how the acoustics of the private room carried sound from the head of the table to the foot. She said, very quietly, "Don't worry about the bill. Patricia is paying. She's been the family's ATM since Walter died. Just smile and let her pay." Bridget laughed. Ashley laughed. They went back to their meals. I had heard her clearly. The private room had hardwood floors and a panelled wood ceiling. The acoustics had carried her voice across the table with the precision of a small concert hall. I had heard the words family's ATM, the words since Walter died, and the words just smile and let her pay. I noticed something then. I noticed that I was not surprised. I noticed that what Ashley had just said quietly to her sister, across her husband's place, setting at her own 40th birthday dinner, was the most honest thing she had said about me in 3.5 years. The watercolor card had been a lie. The thank you notes had been lies. The phrase, "the most generous mother-in-law in the world," had been a lie. The phrase, "family's ATM since Walter died," was the truth. I sat with that truth for approximately 90 seconds. I drank a sip of water. I looked at my plate. I looked very briefly at my son. Daniel had not heard his wife. He was looking at the wine label. He was 45 years old. He was a regional manager at a logistics company. He had been raised by Walter and me, in a house where we had said, "We have enough 1,000 times." He had become, somewhere in the last 20 years, a man who let his wife refer to his mother as the family's ATM at his mother's own table. I did not blame him in that moment. I had blamed him in many previous moments. In this one, I simply noticed the architecture of the family I had married into raising. I had married Walter in 1977. We had raised Daniel and Mark with care. Walter had said, "We have enough," 1,000 times. The men we had raised, both of them now in their mid-40s, had heard the sentence 1,000 times. Daniel had stopped using it, somewhere between 2010 and 2015. He had been at the table when I had heard his wife say family's ATM, and he had not heard her. That was, in its own way, the cost of his deafness. I let the truth sit in my chest for the rest of the meal. I did not say anything. I smiled at Ethan when he came to clear plates. I ordered a small espresso. I sipped it slowly. At 9:53 p.m., the check arrived. Ethan placed it, very carefully, in front of me at the foot of the table. I picked up the leather folder. I opened it. The total was $4,218. The wine pairing alone, the optional tasting program that Ashley had selected in advance, had been $1,620. The tomahawk had been $196. The 2 Wagyu strips had been $256. The kids' menu had come to $74 before dessert. The dessert flights had been $60. There was a service charge of $843 at 20%. There was a private room fee of $250 that had not, in fact, been free despite Daniel's earlier assurance. $4,218 for a Friday night dinner. I slid my credit card into the leather folder. I handed it back to Ethan. He thanked me. He left the room. I noticed that Ashley was watching me. She had clearly heard the snap of the leather folder closing. She was smiling. She said, "Patricia, you really are the most generous person. Thank you so much. I will never forget this." I said, "Sweetheart, happy birthday." She blew me a small kiss across the room. I returned it, with the small, careful smile I had been practicing, in the bathroom mirror for 41 minutes before I had driven over to the restaurant. Ethan returned with the receipt. I signed it. I left a small additional tip for Ethan on top of the service. Charge $80 in cash, which I tucked under the saucer of my espresso cup, because Ethan had been polite, and because he had no idea what he had just been a part of, and because the $80 were mine to give, and not the family's. I stood up. I gathered my purse. I hugged Daniel. I hugged Ashley. I told the children to enjoy their dessert. I said, "I am tired. The drive home is 40 minutes. I am going to head out." Ashley said, "Patricia, thank you again. We love you so much." I said, "I love you too, sweetheart." I walked out of the private room. I walked down the stairs. I left the restaurant. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 6 minutes before I started the engine. I did not cry. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to the contacts. I tapped the entry labeled Citibank Customer Service. I called. I waited 4 minutes for the after-hours fraud department to pick up, even though this was not technically a fraud call. A woman named Lisa answered. I said, "Lisa, my name is Patricia Halloran. My account number is..." I gave her the account number from memory. She verified my identity. I said, "Lisa, I would like to remove an authorized user from my account, effective immediately. The user's name is Daniel Halloran. I would also like to cancel the card associated with another authorized user, Ashley Halloran, effective immediately. I would like both cards to be reported as cancelled in tonight's processing batch, so that any charges attempted after this phone call are denied." Lisa said, "Mrs. Halloran, I can do that. Can you confirm both cards cancelled tonight, both authorized users removed from the account?" I said, "Yes, Lisa." She paused. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, may I ask if this is a situation we need to escalate for fraud, or if this is a personal decision?" I said, "Lisa, this is a personal decision. There is no fraud. The cards were used legitimately, with my permission, for 3.5 years. I am now revoking that permission." She said, "I understand, Mrs. Halloran. The cards will be deactivated in the system within the next 90 seconds. Any attempted charges after that point will be declined. I will mail you the confirmation paperwork by tomorrow. I said, "Thank you, Lisa." She said, "Mrs. Halloran, have a good night." I said, "Lisa, I am going to have a very good night." I hung up. I sat in the parking lot for another 2 minutes. Then I started the car. I drove home. I went to bed at 11:30. I slept the way a woman sleeps when she has, for the first time in 3.5 years, decided what is going to happen next. I did not, on the next morning, hear from Daniel or Ashley. I had expected that I might. I had expected that Ashley would, perhaps Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning, attempt to make a small purchase on her authorized user card, find that it had been declined, and call me to ask whether something was wrong with the account. She did not. She did not. I would later understand, because she did not actually use her credit card very often on weekends. Most of her charging happened on weekday afternoons. Small things at boutiques, midweek salon appointments, the occasional Thursday evening dinner she would describe to Daniel as a girls' night. The first attempted charge after the dinner came on Monday at 10:47 a.m. I knew because the bank sent me a text message. Charge declined. As Riverside Salon, $186. Card ending 8,842. Cancelled. I read the text. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table. At 11:04 a.m., my phone rang. It was Ashley. I let it ring 4 times. I answered. "Patricia, hi. Listen, I am so sorry to bother you. Something weird happened with my card just now. I was paying for my hair appointment and it came back declined. I am so embarrassed. I think there might be a fraud thing happening on the account. Can you call the bank? I think someone might be trying to use your card." I noticed that she had said your card. In 3.5 years, this was the first time she had referred to it as your card. I noticed it. I said, very calmly, "Sweetheart, the card is not the victim of fraud. I cancelled it Friday night." A long silence on the line. You cancelled it." I cancelled it. "I also removed Daniel as an authorized user. Both of your cards are deactivated. They have been deactivated since Friday at 10:07 p.m., which was approximately 18 minutes after the bill at Halloran's was paid." Another silence. I let her hold the silence. She said, "Patricia, I don't understand. Did something happen?" I said, "Sweetheart, something has been happening for 3.5 years. On Friday night at the table, you said something to your sister Bridget across the table. You did not realize the room carried sound from your end to mine. You said, and I am quoting, 'Patricia is the family's ATM since Walter died. Just smile and let her pay.' Your sister laughed. You laughed. The dinner continued. I heard you. I have been carrying that sentence with me since Friday at 8:43 p.m. The card cancellation is my response," she said, very quietly. "Patricia, that was a joke. I didn't mean that was a joke between me and my sister. I would never." I said, "Sweetheart, let me tell you what I know. The phrase family's ATM is not a joke that a woman makes about her mother-in-law in front of her sister at her own birthday dinner, unless she has used the phrase before. You have used it before. I do not need to know how many times. I do not need to know to whom. I need only to know that you have used it enough times that it slipped out, across a table, without you noticing how clearly the room carried your voice." She started to cry. She said, "Patricia, please, please, can we talk about this? Can you come over?" I said, "Sweetheart, no, we are not going to talk about this. The cards are cancelled. The arrangement that began with watercolor flowers in May of 2021 is over." She was crying harder now. She said, "Patricia, what about Daniel? What about—" I said, "Daniel can call me at 6 this evening. I will speak with him then. Not before, not now, at 6. Goodbye, Ashley." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. I made a second cup of tea. I waited for 6 p.m. Daniel called me at 5:52. He was 8 minutes early. I let it ring twice. I answered, Mom. Sweetheart. He took a long breath. Mom, Ashley, told me what happened. She told me about the cards. She told me about what she said at the table. She wants me to apologize on her behalf. She says she's going to write you a letter. She says, Daniel. Yes, Mom. I am going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it honestly, because the rest of our relationship for the next 20 or 30 years is going to be shaped by your answer. A long silence. Okay, Mom. Did you know that Ashley refers to me, when I am not present, as the family's ATM? A longer silence. Mom, I don't. Daniel, yes or no, take your time. He took his time. He said very quietly, Yes, Mom, I have heard her say it before. Twice, maybe 3 times. I did not stop her. Sweetheart, thank you for telling me the truth. Mum, what do I do? Daniel, you are 45 years old. You are a regional manager at a logistics company. You make approximately $178,000 a year. Your wife works as a marketing consultant and earns approximately $90,000. You have 2 children in good public schools. You live in a 4-bedroom house that you and Ashley bought in 2017. You are not, by any honest measurement, a man who needs his mother to pay for his wife's birthday dinner, his daughter's school clothes, or his wife's hair appointments. You have allowed your wife to position me, slowly, into the role of family's ATM, and you have heard her refer to me in those terms at least twice, possibly 3 times. And you have not, at any of those moments, said the sentence your father raised you to say. What sentence, Mom? The sentence your father said 1,000 times in your hearing growing up. We have enough. Your father said it about cars, about vacations, about restaurants, about jewelry, about clothes, about presents. He said it because it was true. We had enough. We never needed more. You grew up in a house where we have enough was the most important sentence in the vocabulary of how we made decisions. You stopped using the sentence somewhere between 2010 and 2015. You have not used it in 15 years. Your father is no longer here to remind you. I am reminding you tonight. He was crying. I let him cry. He said, Mom, I am so sorry. I said, Daniel, I know you are. The relationship between you and me will continue. The credit cards will not. The watercolor card arrangement is over. The autopay on my account is being adjusted so that future charges by either of you will not be processable. Your inheritance, which is a different conversation, is being restructured this week, in conversation with my lawyer, Helen Walsh, into a trust that goes to your 2 children directly. Lily and Connor will inherit, in equal shares, what would have come to you. They will inherit at age 25. The trust is irrevocable. Ashley is not in the trust. You are not in the trust. The grandchildren are. A long silence. He said, Mom, the grandchildren. I said, Daniel. The grandchildren did not write the watercolor card in 2021. The grandchildren have not said the family's ATM at any table. The grandchildren are 11 and 14. They will be old enough when they inherit to understand what they have been given and why. They will continue to be welcome at my house every other Saturday, beginning in February, for as long as I am alive. He was crying harder now. I let him cry. After a while, he said, Mom, what about you and me? What about Ashley and you? I said, Daniel, you and I will have lunch once a month. The first Sunday, noon, my house, alone, without Ashley, for 1 year. After that year, if you have demonstrated that you have remembered how to use the sentence we have enough, we will reassess. Ashley and I will not be in contact for 1 year. After 1 year, if Ashley wishes to write me a paper letter, a real letter, not an email, explaining what she has learned about herself, I will read it. I will not respond until I have read it carefully. If the letter is honest, we will reassess. If it is not, we will not. He nodded. He could not speak for a moment. Then he said, Mom, I love you. I said, I love you too, sweetheart. The first lunch is the first Sunday in December. I will make pot roast. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I did not cry. I made myself a third cup of tea. I went to bed at 10. I want to tell you about the rest of that week. On Tuesday morning, I called Helen Walsh. I told her everything. She listened. When I had finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, Patricia, Walter wrote you a letter in March of 2019. I have been holding it for 5 years and 8 months. I will bring it to your house tomorrow morning at 9. I said, Walter wrote me a letter. She said, he did, Patricia. He came to my office in March of 2019, 11 months before he was diagnosed. He told me, and I am quoting, Helen, I have watched my son's wife for 10 years. She has been getting closer to my wife since Daniel and Ashley moved into their new house in 2017. The closeness is not what it looks like. I would like Patricia to have a folder of instructions for the day she finally notices. He drafted the trust. He drafted the credit card cancellation language, which is in the folder, with the bank's customer service number and a scripted phone call almost identical to the one you made on Friday night. He paid the legal fees in advance. The folder has been on my desk for 5 years and 8 months. I sat with that. I said, Helen. He scripted the phone call. She said, he scripted the phone call, Patricia. He told me, in 2019, Helen. If my wife is ever going to do this, she will need to know the exact words to say to the bank. I do not want her to have to invent them in a parking lot. I closed my eyes. I said, Helen, bring the letter tomorrow. She arrived at 9. I broke the seal. I read, Patricia, if you are reading this, something has happened with our son's wife that has finally clarified what I have been watching for 10 years. I am sorry, I am not there. I am writing this in March of 2019. I have been worried about Ashley since approximately 2014. I have not said anything to you because I have not wanted to be the kind of father-in-law who criticizes his son's wife to his wife. I have written this letter instead. Patricia, whatever has happened, the answer is no. The answer is no to the next request. The answer is no to the request after that. You have been the most generous wife and mother for 43 years. The generosity has been, in our marriage, the most important thing about you. I have loved you for it. I do not want you to stop being generous. I want you to be generous to the people who deserve it, and I want you to redirect the generosity, when the time comes, from the people who do not. The folder Helen has includes everything you will need. The trust, the credit card cancellation language, the bank's after-hours number, the script. I have arranged it all so that on the day you call Helen, you will not need to invent anything. You will only need to read. Patricia, about the phrase, we have enough. I want to remind you of it specifically. We said it 1,000 times to each other and to our boys. Daniel stopped saying it sometime around 2011. He stopped saying it because Ashley does not believe it. She believes the opposite, that there is never enough. I have watched her teach our son to believe the opposite for 10 years. I have been unable to teach him back. I am sorry. The grandchildren may still be teachable. Lily was 9 in 2019. Connor was 6. They will grow up in a household where the phrase is not used. You may need to be the person who reintroduces it to them. The grandchildren are still young. Do not give up on them. Redirect the resources to them. The trust will give you the means. I love you. We had enough. We have enough. You have enough. Walter. I read the letter twice. I did not cry. I folded it. I placed it on the kitchen table. I looked at Helen. I said, Helen. He scripted the phone call. She said, he scripted the phone call, Patricia. He thought of everything. We worked at the kitchen table for 3 hours. I signed the deed transfer to the trust. I signed the irrevocable assignment of the trust to the grandchildren at 25. I signed the restructured will. I signed the additional account protection paperwork that locked any future credit card account in my name from being added to by anyone other than me, in writing, in person, with 2 forms of identification. The notary stamped each document. By 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the trust was registered with the county clerk's office. The grandchildren were the beneficiaries. Ashley was not in the trust. Daniel was not in the trust. The cards were cancelled. The arrangement that had begun with watercolour flowers in May of 2021 was over. That night I sat at Walter's reading chair in the living room with the small notebook I had started keeping the morning after the dinner at Halloran's, and I wrote one line. My son's wife whispered, "Just smile and pay the bill." So I smiled and cancelled the card, and I learned, at 72, that the most generous thing my husband ever did for me was the morning in March of 2019 when he sat in a lawyer's office and scripted, on a piece of paper, the exact words I would say to the bank in a parking lot 5 years later. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in a parking lot on a Friday night with a steady hand on a phone and a husband's voice from 5 years ago, telling you exactly what to say. I closed the notebook. I poured myself a small glass of wine. I sat with it for a while. Then I went to bed. The grandchildren would inherit. I had enough. I had, in fact, always had enough. Walter had been right.